it's Elle. Today we're going to talk about the Wayward children's series. That's what it's called, right? Yeah. This is less of a review and more of a guide to the series. So there is going to be some review elements, but I'm not going to be talking about a lot of my specific thoughts on the books. But I do want to give you a synopsis of what the books are about. I'm out of focus. Okay. We're going to get closer. We're going to get up close and personal for this one. Okay, so we're going to talk about, what the books are about, like the basic synopsis. We're going to talk about the audiobooks because that's how I listen to them, and I'm going to give a critique on the audiobooks themselves. And we're going to talk about the representations that are found and explored within these books, some of the themes of the books, and then I'm going to give some ideas of potential reading orders for them. So let's dive right into it. So what is the Wayward Children series? I also want to talk about age range. Anyway, I'm going to put timestamps down in the bottom, so if I come up with any other things I want to talk about, it'll be timestamped down below. I might put writing, who knows. We'll see what editing Elle really wants to do. So the Wayward Children series is a novella collection, which I think is supposed to be 10 books long, or that's what it's slated for right now. And it's like a portal fantasy where people from our world, when they're children, find doors. And these doors bring them to new places. And I'm sorry if you could hear the hot water, but anyway. These doors bring them to new places, and they bring them to worlds that are good fits for them. So some of the books explore that idea of finding your door and getting into the world. Other books are side quests. And by that I mean they take place in the real world and in these portal worlds. And a group of kids that we know well go on a quest together. So in the first book, Every Heart a Doorway, we're introduced, and these are library copies, hence the shininess. We're introduced to Eleanor West's School of Wayward Children. It's called something like that. And in it, we're introduced to this, when these kids get kicked out of their worlds and find a door back to their home world, and they don't want to come back. They want to be back in the world that they had, the portal world. Then when they can't cope, they go here. And this is kind of how we're introduced to the world, is in book 1. Books 1 through books 5 all have characters, and the short story all have characters that are kind of connected in some way to this school. Book 6 is where we have a divergence, where we're no longer seeing those characters anymore. I want to get into the writing and the age range this is appropriate for, because I think those kind of go together. So the writing is very, I don't want to say flowery, because that's not right, but it's almost like a storytelling, and it's very thematically forward. So Seanan McGuire does not give you space to decide what's good and what's bad, and what is evil and what is not. She tells it to you, and you have to accept it as face value. So there's no exploration of thematic content as a reader. It is something that is spoon-fed. And that might work for some people, and it might not work for others. I think that I have seen these, I've heard people talk about the whole series as adult, as young adult, as children's, and I think it's because it's hard to pinpoint down exactly who these were written for, because I don't think Seanan McGuire really had an audience in mind when she wrote them. She just wrote the books she wanted to write. And so because of that, I think that a lot of people can get enjoyment from them. I think adults that have that nostalgia for childhood and like this feeling of not wanting to belong, or feeling of not belonging, will feel a sense of kinship to the children in these books. And I think that children could also enjoy these. I wouldn't recommend them to young kids, but like, I'm out of focus and I'm in focus. Okay, I think that YA audiences would really enjoy this, and I think preteens, like when kids start to get to the age where they're starting to go through puberty and they start to like level up what they want to read. They don't want to read the middle grade anymore. They want to read the teenage books. I think that is an appropriate age to start diving into these and to start giving these as gifts, because a lot of these books are about girls. Like young girls are a theme of this book, and them not fitting in and them not fitting the mold of what a girl is supposed to be. That's probably one of the biggest themes of the books. Yeah, I would say that there's a huge array of age ranges that would really appreciate these books. And I think that because of the thematic content being so in your face, some people just won't enjoy these because they don't like they don't like the answers being that easy. So let's get into, what else do I want? Oh, let's get into the audiobook. So I consumed all of these as audiobooks, and one thing that is really frustrating is that not all the same people read all of these audiobooks. So they're giving different voices to the same characters, which is very frustrating because I had an idea of the way that they were supposed to sound, and then in the next book they didn't sound like that. So I think that the best person is, let me find out her name. I took notes. I'm a good noodle. Yeah, so my favorite of the audiobook narrators is Cynthia Hopkins. She narrated Every Heart a Doorway, the first one, and In an Absent Dream, the fourth one. So these ones I think had the best narration job of all of them. And like this one is a group of characters, and each character had a really distinct voice. And in this one, it was a girl falling into a portal world, and they also had really good voices in this one. Okay, my least favorite is actually the ones that Seanan McGuire herself narrated, which is interesting. And I think that just has to do with her not really being not being an audiobook narrator. You know, she's an author, so, you know, she's just not as good at both of them, in my opinion. I don't think she was really good with voices. It doesn't matter as much with Down Among the Sticks and Bones. This is one of my preferred books in this series. This one is the second book, and then she also narrates the fifth book, which has Jack and Jill again. It's Come Tumbling Down. This one is where I think it's a bit more disappointing because you see a lot of the same characters as you do in the first book, and not only do they not have the same voices, but the voices aren't distinct in this. Like, you cannot really tell who's talking based on what they sound like. So, you know, in the first one, one of the characters, Cade, is said to have a Southern accent, and it's done in the first one, and it kind of wavers. Like, there is sometimes a Southern accent, but it's almost like she forgets that's what she's supposed to be doing, and so then it just kind of goes away. All right, and then the other ones have totally different narrators as well. So again, this one is by Michelle Dockery, and it has a lot of the same ones as the characters as the first and the fifth, but again, they don't really sound the same. I think this one's a bit closer to the first. It's hard. I think maybe she was trying to sound like the same as what they were set up as in the first book. And then this one, they're totally new characters, so it doesn't really matter. The sixth book, which is Anna Marie Carlson. So that is it for the audiobooks. Let's talk about reading orders. So people, like, I've seen people talk about, like, you can read this one without reading this one, and so on and so forth. And I think I just want to get out there my opinions on reading orders, my opinions on which ones are connected, so you will spoil yourself if you don't read them in that order, so on. People say you could read them without reading the first one. I just really do not recommend doing that. They're so short that you might as well. The first one opens up the world. It tells you about the school. You meet a lot of the main characters from different books. You learn about the different types of worlds. I just highly recommend reading the first one first. So say you're just not going to listen to me. Say you're going to be like, well, that one doesn't sound like the one I want to read, so I'm not going to read that one first. Okay. Well, if you do not want to be spoiled for what's in the first, you have to read it before you read the third one. And if you do not want the third one spoiled, then you have to read that before you read the 5th one. So basically, these 3 have dependencies on each other. So in order to read the 5th, you have to have read the 3rd and 1st, and in order to read the 3rd, you have to have read the 1st. And it's because they're chronological and they have all of the same characters involved. So these 3 are the main ones that have, these are the side quest ones. These are the ones with, well, this one's the introductory one. And then these are the side quests. These are the groups, the same group of characters for the most part, going on adventures together. So we're going to assume that you followed my advice and you read Every Heart a Doorway first. And then you go, I really like these character dynamics. I like seeing all of the group together. That's what I want to read next. If that's the case, then I recommend going to the 3rd book next, because you get to see basically all of them again. But maybe you're like, well, actually, I found Lundy super interesting. I want to hear her backstory. Then you'd go to the 4th one and read In an Absent Dream. And when you read this, also read her short story, Juice Like Wounds, which is on Tor.com. I will put a link in the description so that you can go and check it out. I would recommend reading the 4th book before reading Juice Like Wounds, because there's a side quest in this that between Lundy, Moon, and Mockery, and you just kind of hear who Mockery is, but you don't actually see the quest take place. And it's like, it kind of feels like a big piece of the story missing, but there's Juice Like Wounds, which you could read, which you meet Mockery in. So yeah, if you want to read Lundy's backstory, read this. If you really like Jack and Jill, then I would recommend going to read Down Among the Sticks and Bones. This is Jack and Jill's backstory of them finding their door. So it's a prequel to the 1st book, and In an Absent Dream is also a prequel. I would say another kind of dependency is that you don't really want to read Come Tumbling Down before you read Down Among the Sticks and Bones, because this introduces Jack and Jill back into the narrative, and you can read it without reading this, but I think having their backstory makes this one more enjoyable. And then if you didn't like any of the characters and you just kind of want to see someone find a door, then you could read Across the Green Grass Fields, which is the 6th book in the series. This is the one that, I've got to be honest, I read all the other ones twice, but I did remember, I read this one and then I reread all of the others. And I didn't read this one that long ago, and I honestly don't really remember anything about it. It's just a girl who goes to, a horse girl going into a horse place. Okay, another thing I want to talk about is when I get into the subject of reading orders, is that I actually read these chronologically. When I first read them, I read 1 through 6, and then when I reread them, I read them in a different order. And I didn't read the 6th one because it's not connected. I just wanted to see and to test it and see if you could read them in a different order and if it would give you a different experience. And they're so short that I don't know how different of an experience it really gave me, but it just proved the point that these definitely don't have to be read in the same order to be appreciated. So I read the 1st, and then I went into another side quest, and I read the 3rd. I went into Lundy's backstory, and I read the 4th, and then I followed Jack and Jill, and I read the 2nd, and then I read the 5th. Another thing that these books do is that they explore different types of representation, and that's one thing people really enjoy about these, is that a lot of different people can feel seen by these books. Now, I will say that I do not share any of the representations that exist and are directly called out in these books, so I can't speak to how good they are. So I recommend that if you do share them and you want to know, that you look up Own Voices reviews of them. So I'm just going to talk about, I think that there's 2 things. There's representations that happen passively, and there's representations that are talked about more actively on the page. So in Every Heart a Doorway, the 1st book, there is a trans character and there is a ace character, and both of those representations are actively talked about. We're having conversations, other kids are learning about them on the page. And then there's a Latino character and there's a Japanese character, and it is stated that they are Latino and Japanese, but there's not a conversation around that. It doesn't really it's really just mentioned. So I would say that they exist, but it's not, at least as far as I could read into it, not a super active representation. We're not discussing it all of that much. So yeah, in this there's ace rep and trans rep. Then in the second one, there is OCD rep and queer rep. I don't know if it's ever directly stated what Jack identifies as. In the third book, it's made a lot of the same characters as the first book, plus there's fat rep with one of the new characters that comes into play. The fourth book, I honestly don't remember any sort of representation being discussed all that much on the page. There's definitely discussion. She has to go to a home for girls at some point. There's definitely a discussion of queer girls being forced there, but besides that, I don't really remember much being involved. And then in the fifth book, a lot of the same people as the first and third. I will say that the OCD rep is a lot more explored in this one than it is in the second one. And then the sixth book, the protagonist is intersex. So those are only the ones that I noted while I was reading. There might be more that I did not write down or think of. Any final thoughts I have? I personally, so maybe I'll talk a little bit about the ones I liked. So I personally liked the ones that were people finding their portals, or portal worlds. I found those ones more interesting. I think that for me, Seanan McGuire's weakness is a lot of the time in her dialogue. Maybe it's just listening to it on audio, but I found it super awkward. And I found that she had a harder time having like a group of characters interact, whereas when someone found their world, there was a lot more exposition, and I appreciated those bits a bit more. So my favorite book, I would say, is probably the fourth one, In an Absent Dream. This one is the most unsettling. Like, if you read the first one first, you'll know Lundy's story as an adult, and then you're finding out her backstory, and it's just more creepy. Maybe the world's a bit more eerie, and the mood of it is just a bit more sad. I would say the one I liked second best is Down Among the Sticks and Bones. I really liked seeing Jack and Jill's backstory. This one had a lot of conversation of what it means to be a girl and what it doesn't mean to be a girl, and it's just not something I'd seen a lot in writing up until this point. I think that looking back on the series now, it's just being a girl, and there's no such thing as being a right girl, it's such a theme, and I think for me it's a little bit overdone at this point within the series. I don't know if I enjoy this as much now that I've read the whole series, and just the thematic content is a little too tight for me, but I still really liked their backstory. I would say these two are my least favorites. I just don't really remember this one all that much, and because it was new characters, I wasn't super attached to them. And then this one, you revisit Jack and Jill, and I was just a little bit disappointed by how that happened. But not to say these are bad, these are sort of my thoughts. I liked that in this one, I feel like all of the worlds that we really explore are very highly logical, and you know when you read the first book that there's non-logical worlds, there's these worlds full of nonsense, and you visit kind of like a side logic nonsense world in this one, and I like that because in the first book, it kind of makes it seem like most of the worlds are like a bit nonsensical or lighter, happier places with rainbows and ponies and blah, blah, blah. And like, you don't actually see those in any of these Portal books, but you do kind of see it in this one. I think my overall thoughts on this series are that I think I'll keep reading them because they're short and they're easy to get through. They're consumable. I wish that Seanan McGuire would focus more on like these, maybe, she alludes in the first book to characters who don't like that they were found in a world and have a hard time coping when they come back because they're just trying to forget it. Like, they did not go into a door that worked for them. And I think that that would be interesting to see on the page and explored in a short story, or in one of these novellas. I also think that it would be a bit nicer if like she expanded the scope of the themes that she's exploring a bit more, because like I said, they're a little too tight for me narratively. I want it to branch out a bit. Like, maybe we follow a boy who falls through a portal. Maybe we follow, like I said before, someone who falls through a portal that they didn't like the world and it's kind of a terrifying experience. Maybe we see that school. I think that there's so many places that this could go that it's a bit frustrating that it's not going there. But it's overall, I mean, it's fun reads. I would really recommend them to younger audiences, and to give them, maybe if you're not a younger audience, I don't think my audience is young at all, but to recommend them to the young people in your life. And that is all I got for this. In the comments below, let me know if you have read these, if you agree with some of my reading orders, and any thoughts you have on these books or this review. And until next time, happy reading.